On July 29th, 1994, I established Judicial Watch to watch over judges. I had seen a lot of injustice. I had seen judges coming into the court unprepared. I had seen them wearing politics on their sleeve, and I saw them harming real people like you. Later on, after I ran for the U.S. Senate in Florida, I began Freedom Watch to continue the same mission. In the course of my travels, in the course of my work, I came up with a five-point plan to reform the judiciary, the federal judiciary in particular. The state judiciary is much more responsive to the people because, generally speaking, they're elected and not put in there for what they incorrectly believe is life. They're not. Federal judges serve for good behavior. In fact, if it was up to Thomas Jefferson, he wouldn't have had federal judges at all. He said they're despots and tyrants. That's what they would become, unaccountable to the people. And we certainly have seen that in recent years, not just with President Trump, but with virtually anyone that stands up to fight the establishment, left or right. And of course, you know I'm a conservative, I'm a religious conservative, but that gets even special treatment coming in front of these judges because many of the establishment rhinos could care less that you are, in fact, conservative or you're a person of faith. In fact, they run away from that because that's not in any way convenient for them with their colleagues and their standing, going to parties and such, particularly in places like Washington, D.C. Let me tell you what this five-point plan is. And I've established at Freedom Watch a Department of Judicial and Legal Accountability with very prominent people on our advisory board, such as Congressman Nancy Mace, such as former UN Ambassador Alan Keyes, such as former U.S. Attorney Bob Barr, and others. We'll be moving forward with this. It's much like the Department of Government Accountability that was formed by Elon Doge. We need to work with President Trump. We need new legislation, and we need to reform how judges are selected and how they act on the bench. One, judges should be chosen on the basis of merit, not political campaign contributions, which is the way it happens now. And sometimes it's even worse, out and out bribery. Lobbyists, such as the American Conservative Union and Federalist Society, put forward names that make money doing that, a lot of money, and a lot of money it takes to put a federal judge, generally speaking, on the court. Two, they need to be held accountable. They should only serve for 2 4-year terms, renewable for good behavior. In our long, long history, there have been very few judges that have been impeached. I think only 8 in our entire history, and most of them for not showing up to work or drunkenness, not for taking bribes, not for doing illegalities. That's overlooked. The FBI looks the other way because they depend on these judges to get convictions in their cases. You'll very rarely hear about any such investigation, much like you'll never really read about much with regard to professional sports. That's covered up too. Many things in our society go unresolved and unaccounted for. 3, and this is most important, we need to make it clear in legislation that they do not have absolute immunity. The Supreme Court years ago gave absolute immunity to itself and to lower court federal judges. And how did they do it, may you ask? They took it under the common law, so they claim, from ancient England, where King George III gave immunity to his corrupt judges so they could rubber stamp his illegal edicts. Ask yourself this question: why did we fight a revolution when in fact our legal system had been stolen by King George III back to the Court of St. James, particularly with regard to criminal justice, when we now adopt the actions of King George III in protecting his judges and now our judges? And that accounts for why they make decisions which make no sense and are illegal under the rule of law, much more the law of man, the law of God, and nature's God, as it says in our Declaration of Independence. Third, judges should be required to go to judge school, to get a master's degree, to learn how to be a judge before they can even qualify to be appointed to the bench in the federal system. In fact, those judges that go take to the bench frequently act as if they were criminal defense lawyers, or in fact prosecutors, or in fact corporate lawyers, or in fact, people who have done other things. I guess the judges are calling as we speak. They don't like what I have to say, but they're like Dr. Strangelove. Remember that movie with Peter Sellers where he was imported from Nazi Germany to become a national security advisor, and every time he addressed the American president, he raised his hand in a Sieg Heil? Well, facetiously speaking, it's almost like that. Then, of course, we should get them insurance, and they should have to pay for it themselves. If they make a decision which is grossly negligent, reckless, and/or intentional, which harms litigants, they should have to have an insurance company compensate those victims, because frequently people cannot afford to take appeals. They can certainly not afford to go to the Supreme Court, which has become a court only of the rich and powerful and can even afford to have the pleadings bound in special covers. That's the patrician nature of our Supreme Court. These are just some of the recommendations I make to put into legislation, and I'm working to do that right now with various people who can get that done. But more importantly, we need to hold judges accountable. They need to be brought before our citizens' grand juries. They need to be tried. They need to be convicted. They need to do some jail time for what they've done to harm this country over the many years, the federal judges in particular. Not all judges are bad. There are many good judges, and I support them and I compliment them. And I would say that judges are our most important public servants. They're there to protect us from the tyranny of the other two branches of government and ourselves. I'm not anti-judge. One time I was asked to be a judge by Senator Connie Mack in Florida, and I declined. But this is something that needs to be done. We need to reform the legal system, and we cannot continue to go the way we're going now, because without a legal system that works and is viable and is just, we're looking at violent revolution. And that's why I suggest that you get my book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America, because in fact, we are at that crossroads right now, and we can see it with the violence that's occurring in society. So God bless you. God bless your family. God save America. Remember, the Father and Son will only help us if we help ourselves. But we need honest, and we need law-abiding, and we need conscientious, and we need intelligent federal judges on our bench. Currently, by and large, we don't have that. What we have are a bunch of political hacks that feather the nest of those that bribe their way onto the bench on behalf of these judges. It's just one example. The firm of Wilmer and Hale, which gave rise to Robert Mueller, a firm in Washington, D.C., one of these mega firms, mostly Democrat, have both Republican and Democrat judges that they had appointed to the bench. And that's a great sales tool. When a client comes in, oh, we own the judges. We'll take care of things. Well, that's what I'm talking about. So yes, pray and support Freedom Watch at freedomwatchusa.org. freedomwatchusa.org with tax-deductible contributions. We are your real Justice Department, and we're complementary to the Trump Justice Department, where I believe that Tam Bondi is doing a great job, but she can't do it alone, and neither can President Trump. I'll be back tomorrow with another special podcast. Thank you for listening to me.